Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Christian Church of Austin, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're invited and welcome. This sermon for Sunday, February 12th, 2017, is entitled Pushing Beyond, Case Studies. It's a reflection on a reading from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verses 21 through 37. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Christian Church, simply head over to our website, www.uccaustin.org. Thank you.
Our reading today comes from the New Testament, from the Gospel.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verses 21 through 37, as we continue to read from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Let's listen together for a word from God for us in these words from Matthew. Jesus continued to speak to the disciples and the crowds. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gifts at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him. Or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go to hell. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. May our ears hear, may our minds understand, and our hearts act upon these words.
It's good to be with you this morning. I'll admit that my preaching has taken a back seat over the past few years as I concentrate on finishing up my licensed clinical social work designation. And as those tasks of supervision and studying for an exam come to an end, I've been thinking a lot about what's next for me professionally. How and where is God calling me to be? And possibly a more telling question, where am I feeling called, yet I seem to be avoiding? It's no secret, as I share it with you almost every time I'm up here, preaching is not my favorite clergy activity. It's outside of my comfort zone for many reasons. Some reasons are good and some not so much. I'm confident that many of you can relate to just how easy it is to avoid doing those things that are outside of our comfort zones. Lately, though, I've been inspired by many of you, inspired by your willingness to move beyond your comfort zones and give voice to those things that are important to you. But even more than that, your willingness to stand up and give voice to those things you feel are crucial and important for the well-being and wholeness of others. Things like marching in the Women's March and creating opportunities to continue the spirit of that march. Writing letters and postcards to politicians in support of or in opposition to various executive orders or bills or nominees. Making multiple phone calls even when phone lines are turned off and voicemails are full. Providing feedback at public forums and showing up to press conferences. Ensuring the safety of others by being part of a human wall. Engaging in civil discussions, debates, and learning opportunities. Taking the time to have those difficult conversations in ways that build bridges instead of being divisive. These are just a few of the ways that I see members of this community branching out, oftentimes outside of comfort zones, to engage in the world around us, both locally and afar. My hope is that how we view God, how we see God working in the world, and even how we understand our role in that work, that all of that together is guiding our moral understanding and willingness to push beyond our comfort zones, to transcend that which is presented as the status quo of the world that we live in, and to challenge the perceived systemic normalization of certain beliefs and attitudes. This moral understanding, or rather violations of this moral understanding, is why we speak out, why we show up, why we act. This moral understanding that God's unconditional love and grace is for all people, no matter where they are on life's journey. This saintly belief that we are called to live as what Paul describes as a spiritual people, to pray through and with our actions live out those words, "Thy kingdom come now, thy will be done now on earth as it is in heaven, forever and always." As I read through the Gospel of Matthew's account of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, I find myself relating to this community and where they appear to be on their God journey. Here we have a very Jewish community being instructed to not necessarily abandon their Jewish essence, but instead being encouraged to embrace more fully their call as a Jewish people by living into a greater understanding of God's kingdom. We are mistaken if we read Matthew as a community trying to be something other than Jewish. We are even more mistaken if we interpret them as trying to be Christian. The term Christian, or the idea of Christianity as a separate religion, did not exist at this point in time. These are Jews wanting to remain Jews, yet willing to question tradition in order to faithfully follow God's call on their lives, and in turn, faithfully live out that call in the world around them. If the term progressive existed 2,000 years ago, they might have been known as the progressive Jews. How many of us can relate? Oh, I'm Christian, just not that kind of Christian. Perhaps if we were to go back in time, we would hear members of Matthew's community explaining, oh, I'm Jewish, just not that kind of Jewish. In the verses immediately preceding our reading today, Jesus declares, I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. Jesus is not against being Jew. After all, he is one. Jesus is not opposed to the Torah, or what we refer to as the Old Testament. He is not even in complete opposition to the laws within the Torah. Rather, Jesus rejects the strict, legalistic adherence and the conventional of his time interpretations of the law. With this sermon, he challenges his followers to move beyond the normalized understanding of what it means to be a good Jew, a good follower of God. He does this by recasting and intensifying the Jewish tradition in light of his sense of understanding of God's will for the world. In simple terms, Jesus is asking more of his followers than the law requires. Again, thy kingdom come now, thy will be done now on earth as it is in heaven, forever and always. So that's the larger picture of our reading today. What the lectionary so nicely offers us today, though, is 4 case studies illustrating how Jesus wants his followers to move and to do more, to push beyond the current status quo and move closer to God's kingdom here on earth. The 4 cases being murder and anger, adultery, divorce, and oath-taking. At this point, I'd like to pause and point out the failure on my part to not read this week's lectionary before asking John if I could preach today. Pastor John gets blessed are the scriptures, and I get murder and anger, adultery, divorce, and oath-taking. Next time, I'm going to plan a little better. Before we look briefly at each case, it's important at the highest level that we understand 2 things, although they are related. One is the historical context in which these case studies are situated in. And 2 is what is at the heart of each of these cases. First, these cases are situated in a certain time and a certain place. Situated in a time and place where the societal and religious norms are very different than that of today. These are not scriptures that we can read today and then take literally at face value saying that this is the new law for all time, end of story. No, we need to remember that Jesus is using examples relevant to his time and his place to explain to this community how they need to do more, to push beyond the traditional definitions and understandings of the laws that they follow. Meeting tradition's bare minimum standard of being on the right side of these laws is not going to cut it in God's kingdom. While simultaneously holding up the law, Jesus moves the adherence standards of each law so as to more fully create and materialize God's kingdom. So context, time, and place matter. Second, at the heart of these 4 cases is the desire for equitable human relationships. They each emphasize the importance of authentic, humanizing relationships. Jesus' starting point for this expected reality is a place where restoration, inclusion, healing, abundance, and true peace are the norm, not brokenness, violence, alienation, or dehumanizing of the other. Jesus demonstrates how even when the laws are met by the traditional understanding and adherence, relationships can still be broken, harm still can be done, and people can still be oppressed. Case study 1, murder and anger. So rather than a casuistic debate of contexts in which killings may or may not be legitimate, Jesus warns of unresolved anger and calls for concrete acts of reconciliation. Basically, he's saying that anger destroys relationships in a way akin to murder. And regardless of who caused the problem in the relationship, the person who becomes aware of the difficulty is responsible for taking steps towards reconciliation. Hard, I know. No one said pushing forward towards God's kingdom would be easy. We need to keep in mind two things, though. One, anger is a God-given feeling, one that can serve a healthy purpose, and one that can be used as a catalyst for change. It is not necessarily the anger that is the issue, but rather how you choose to respond to or live out that anger that is important. The second thing to keep in mind is that reconciliation is a process that takes time and energy and intentionality. Reconciliation is more than just, I forgive you. It's about accountability, repair, equality. True reconciliation, true wholeness of relationship can take many years depending on the degree of brokenness and the willingness of all parties to participate authentically. In some cases, reconciliation may not be possible to complete in our lifetime. Nevertheless, it's a path that we should strive to place ourselves on again and again, no matter how hard or how long that road is. Case number 2, adultery. In biblical world, adultery was defined as extramarital sexual intercourse between a man and another man's property, that is, his wife. The prohibition against adultery grew out of the property laws of ancient Israel, where the wife belonged to her husband. The extramarital relationship violated the rights of her husband and had nothing to do with the rights of the woman. Interestingly, a married man could have such a relationship with an unmarried woman and would not be guilty of adultery. When Jesus speaks against adultery, he goes beyond the obvious, you should not lay with another married man's wife. No, he pushes the meaning of this law further. Jesus collapses the distinction between thought and action, suggesting that women should not be reduced to a sexual object. Women are not a thing. They are not a commodity to be consumed or used or abused. Again, it is not the feeling of being attracted to someone that is the issue. Attraction is part of our God-given human makeup, just as is anger. It becomes an issue when we don't see the other as a whole human being and instead reduce the other to a thing. These are pretty powerful pro-women words spoken at a time when women were not viewed as whole humans. In many ways, not much has changed today. One of my favorite news quotes this week echoes this thought. Thinking of women primarily as wives and daughters means thinking of them in terms of their relationship to men, which often means forgetting that women are also full human beings in their own right. Case study number 3, divorce. Jesus' statements on divorce is not meant to be turned into the new restriction that forever keeps broken marriages bound together. Jesus values and upholds God's original intent for marriage. That is, marriage as a mutually loving, helping, life-giving union. This is what Jesus is asking for from this community. Recognizing that men during this time had all the power, and knowing that divorce was basically a life sentence of poverty for women. Jesus places the burden on the man to do more to preserve God's original intent for marriage when possible. Finally, case study number 4, taking oaths. The need for oaths implies that without an oath, one's word cannot be trusted. Jesus calls for simple, unabashed honesty, that one's yes means yes, and one's no means no. If truthfulness is characteristic of a life lived under the rule of God, there is no need for oaths. This does not mean that oaths are never to be used, but that truth-telling is its own validation. As God's followers, oaths should really just be a formality. Doesn't that sound like heaven? To live in a world or even a country where you could trust that what was being said was truthful, or at the very least, not intentionally untruthful. In each of these scenarios, Jesus is calling for an entirely new way of viewing human relationships, a better way of living into God's kingdom in the here and now. And like this Matthean community, we are being called into new ways of creating and sustaining and reconciling human relationships through a deeper and ever-expanding moral understanding. An enhanced social ethic grounded in the quest of God's kingdom and will now on earth as it is in heaven. Signs of a truly just society in which the greatest commandments as taught by Jesus are lived out: loving God, loving others, and loving self. As these case studies illustrate, we will not have a just society by only following the law. For a just society, we need to do more. We need to push beyond our complacency with the laws and tradition, push beyond our comfort zones to do and be all that we can be as God's children. For if we aren't uncomfortable living in the world around us, we probably aren't doing it right. Our broken world needs God's spiritual people, needs you and needs me to push beyond. In closing, I want to share the question that has been on my heart this week as I lived into these scriptures. In true godly play fashion, I wonder if Jesus were to give his Sermon on the Mount today, in our context, in our time, and in our place, I wonder what his case studies would be. That's where God's people need to be, showing up and speaking out. Please pray with me. Gracious, loving God, may our eyes be opened and our bodies be moved to seek your justice, your kingdom, your will here on earth now. Help push us beyond our comfort zones as we strive to live the kind of social ethic you proclaim for this world, loving you, loving others, and loving self. Amen.